Testaments, a call to respect those at the margins of life, a call to be generous and open-hearted and kind to those who suffer and struggle, to be attentive to and present to those who are in prison, who are widows, who are orphans, to allow the gleaning of a field, which means to make sure that out of the abundance of our productivity on our farms, we make sure that we feed those who hunger here at home and abroad. You cannot miss the central message, which is, as you have said, kindness to those on the margins, attentiveness to those in need, news to the poor. And so in this season of Lent, I ask my friend and colleague whether he's aware of our president's intention to impose significant tariffs sometime today or tomorrow that may raise the costs for working families in our nation, that may make harder the lives of those who struggle to pay for their children's food and medicines and schooling, that instead of meeting his promise to make America affordable again, will almost certainly make America less affordable for those who are exactly those to whom we are called to give attention, kindness, and service. I ask my colleague and my friend, are you aware of President Trump's so-called Liberation Day that will impose, in fact, thousands of dollars of additional costs on the working families of America who struggle so hard to make ends meet, in a direct violation of a call to care for those in need?
Yes, I'm aware. I said earlier that he calls it Liberation Day, and I'm not sure what he means by that, because Americans will not, by this move, be liberated from high prices. They won't be liberated from watching their 401ks dwindle in value as the stock market goes down. They won't be liberated from the high cost of groceries. They won't be liberated by the high cost and hard availability of housing. He calls it Liberation Day, but Americans won't be liberated from crushing debt, from medical debt, from student loan debt, parents who are struggling to take care of their parents and their children, who rely on Medicaid because a parent has Alzheimer's and a child has a disability, and they're trying to make it all work, but yet they're shackled in fear because they see that recommended to a House committee on Energy and Commerce was to find $880 billion of cuts to the programs that they are relying on as a lifeline to keep their family together. Who's liberated? Who's liberated by the tariffs that he's going to come and bring onto a country where half this nation is dealing with a tough economic reality, where half of the renters in this country, you and I were both local leaders, we know it is technically the definition of housing insecurity if you are paying more than a third of your income on rent. Chris Coons, you love people, you know people, you travel Delaware, it's a much smaller state. I do say that with some little bit of twisted non-Christian arrogance and from New Jersey looking down. But you know people in your state. I've been with you in your state. You're connected to your communities. So you know people that are struggling just to make ends meet. You know people that are one emergency away, like a car accident or sickness that forces them to miss a week of work and a paycheck, that will throw their lives in financial ruin. Is this president doing his promises to make their lives better? President Trump is calling his tariffs Liberation Day. You think Canada feels liberated from the bully neighbor that is Donald Trump? Do you think Greenland feels liberated from the bully nature? Do you think Panama feels liberated? What about universities that are cutting NIH funding, that are cutting the scientific research that will cure the diseases in the future, that will alleviate suffering, that now aren't allowing postdocs to come to their school? They're not hiring, they're slashing the number of engineering students that they're allowing in because they're terrified because this president is menacing indirect costs. Is that liberation? 71 days in, now 72 days. I asked you, are you better off than you were 72 days ago economically? I asked that question. Ask it to your friends. Are they better off economically? Well, I don't see how they could be because prices are up, stock market's down, the risk of recession is climbing, consumer confidence is in the gutter, 401k plans are losing value. Are you better off than you were 72 days ago under this president's leadership on the verge of his so-called Liberation Day that's going to drive prices up even more? And he's doubling down on tax cuts for the rich. He wants an economy that works for him, his billionaire donors, his powerful special interests, and it's coming at the expense of working people who are struggling to get by, and a lot of the programs that they rely on, like for their health care, like for their Social Security. He wants an economy where the richest people get the biggest tax cuts, where the largest corporations, heck, they may get to skip out on taxes altogether. And where hardworking Americans are getting crushed by rising food prices and rising rents. This idea that might trickle down. But we know it doesn't work. He's continuing the same reckless economic approach he used in his first term. Massive tax cuts that inure mostly to the wealthy, unchecked spending, rapacious spending, big holes in our national debt, trillions of dollars of more debt, and no serious plan on how to pay for any of this thing that he's doing. From Social Security to public health to the education that supports children with disabilities and scientific research, the safety nets that millions of people depend upon. Here's the New York Times. Trump's policies have shaken a once solid economic outlook. This is from March 7th. President Trump inherited an economy that was, by most conventional measures, firing on all cylinders. Wages, consumer spending, and corporate profits were rising. Unemployment was low. The inflation rate, though higher than normal was falling. Just weeks into Mr. Trump's term, the outlook is gloomier. Measures of business and consumer confidence have plunged. The stock market has been on a roller coaster ride. Layoffs are picking up. And by the way, this was March 7th. We just finished March, the worst performing quarter in years in the stock market. Back to the article. Layoffs are picking up, according to some data, and forecasters are cutting their estimates for economic growth this year, with some even predicting that the U.S. gross domestic product could shrink in the first quarter. And some commentators have gone further, arguing that the economy could be headed for a recession, a sharp rebound in inflation, or even the dreaded combination of the two, stagflation. Most economists consider that unlikely, saying growth is more likely to slow than to give way to a decline. Still, the sudden deterioration in the outlook is striking, especially because it is almost entirely a result of Mr. Trump's policies and the resulting uncertainty. Tariffs and the inevitable retaliation from trading partners will increase prices and slow down growth. Federal jobs cut will push up unemployment and could lead government employees and contractors to pull back on spending while they wait to learn their fate. Deportations could drive up costs for industries like construction and hospitality and the agricultural sector that depend on immigrant labor. In quotes, if the economy was starting out in quite good shape, it probably is in less good shape after what we've seen the last few weeks, said Donald Rizzmiller, chief economist at Stratgas, a research firm. The U.S. economy has repeatedly shown its resilience in recent years, and there are parts of Mr. Trump's agenda that could foster growth. Business groups have responded enthusiastically to Republican plans to cut taxes and reduce regulation. A streamlined government could, in theory, make the overall economy more productive. So far, however, the Trump administration's approach to economic policy has been characterized more by chaos tariffs that are announced and then delayed, government workers who are fired and rehired, then careful planning. Michael Strain, an economist at the conservative American Enterprise Institute, I know AEI well, said Trump's policies on trade and immigration and his slash and burn approach to federal job cuts would have a damaging effect. This is a conservative think tank. What President Trump has proposed will not cause a recession, he continued, but it will slow economic growth. It will take money out of people's pockets. It will increase the unemployment rate. It will cost people jobs. It will make American businesses less competitive. That's AEI, folks. It is certainly possible for Mr. Trump's policies to come together in a way that causes a recession. His tariffs alone could shave a full percentage growth in the domestic product this year, according to some economic models, enough to cut in half the 2% growth rate that economists expected going into this year. Many economists contend that deporting millions of immigrants, as Mr. Trump promised to do on the campaign trail last year, could be even more harmful than tariffs, given the U.S. economy's need for workers, particularly in industries like construction and healthcare. And the administration's push to shrink the federal government, an effort led by Elon Musk, could leave hundreds of thousands of federal workers and government contractors looking for jobs when hiring has slowed. That could set off a chain reaction. Workers who lose jobs or worry they might would pull back on spending, which would force businesses to cut costs, leading to more layoffs and further reductions in spending. Ordinarily, that would prompt the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates and shore up the economy, but that could be difficult if tariffs are also pushing up prices, making policymakers nervous that cutting interest rates could spur inflation. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, said Jay Bryson, chief economist for Wells Fargo, certainly not a great liberal organization, Wells Fargo. He says all things individually aren't enough to cause a recession, but if you layer them on top of one another, it might be. Most economists think such an outcome is relatively unlikely. However, Mr. Trump has repeatedly delayed full enforcement of his promised tariffs. For example, on Thursday, this article is from March 7th, he suspended tariffs on most imports from Mexico and Canada until April. What month are we in? April. His deportation efforts have likewise gotten off to a slow start, and some of the cuts to the federal workforce have been tied up in court, as they should be. Such delays and reversals will help blunt the impact of Mr. Trump's policies and could make a recession less likely, at least in the short term, but the prolonged uncertainty could have its own costs, leading businesses to delay investment and hiring decisions. If we don't get clarity by the back half of this year, economic uncertainty can be like a deer in the headlights, said Nancy Lazar, chief global economist and at the investment bank Piper Sandler. Things just stop. Business confidence is muted, employment is muted, and capital spending is put on hold. Even if Mr. Trump's policies don't cause a recession, they could do long-term damage. Lower immigration will leave the country with a smaller labor force as a native-born population is aging. Trade barriers will be a relatively modest drag on growth while in place, a chronic condition rather than an acute one. It's less the economy is in a car wreck, and it's more like the economy has decided to start smoking a pack a day, said an economist at the Roosevelt Institute. In certain places and for certain groups, the consequences could be harder to ignore. Veterans, who make up a disproportionate share of federal workers, could be particularly hard hit by government layoffs. So could parts of the countries that depend heavily on federal jobs. Apparently, there are signs that home prices in the Washington metropolitan area are falling. It's going to be substantial for certain communities. When you look at the aggregate, it's going to be challenging.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I talked or texted with this person who's asking me to yield the floor. I've been letting this power go to my head. I've never in the Senate had the ability to hold the floor and leave a person in a little bit of limbo. I just want to say that Tim Kaine is one of the friends, and honestly, he's like a pastor to me. He's one of the more honorable men I've met in my life, and and struggles like me about faith and public service. I read your book. I really hope more people read your book. I didn't think it was going to be as beautiful as it was. I laughed, I wept. When you were attacked by spiders and things like that, I'm sorry, I was laughing at your misfortune, sir. It's a book about you going through your whole state. By walking the Appalachian Trail, canoeing. Every story you told moved me. It's a great book. I've read a lot of my colleagues' books, but this one really touched me. You have this beautiful view of America, and I want people to read your book. I really want people to read your book. So if I should yield, I'll yield only if you'll tell people the name of your book and maybe tell something about it. This is Extortion on the Senate Floor. I'm going to hold on to the floor unless you agree to that. You can shake your head up and down if you agree. All right. Then, of course, to my dear friend, and somebody that I probably wouldn't be standing here. We had some discussions about procedural opportunities and things like that. He had to make some concessions to me. I won't give details, but he's an honorable man, and in the crux before I came here, he really helped to clear the pathway for me to stand here now. I owe you a lot of my 12 years. You are like a big brother to me, and I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, thank you to my friend, Senator Booker, and to all who are gathered to watch this very, very important vigil. And the question that I'm going to ask in slow motion to give you a chance to think of a response.
God bless you.
Is a question that was inspired by your colloquy with Senator Coons, where you guys were
not a colloquy, that's not allowed. It was a question.
You were discussion, where you were doing some Bible quoting back and forth. And as you know, I'm a big Bible reader. And the thing I thought about, and actually I've thought about it during your talk since last night, is this part of the Gospel of Matthew where he's challenging people that he thinks are hypocrites. And he says to them, you can discern the faces of the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the times. Wow. That's Matthew 16:2-3. You can discern the faces of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. The way I view this vigil that you have been powerfully engaged upon is you are attempting to discern and explain the signs of the times to your colleagues and to our country, and that's very important that we do. And I'd like to ask you one question about the signs of the times economically to follow the discussion of what we're seeing, but then I want to ask you a question about the signs of the times more in the nature of our democracy. So to begin on the economy, you walked through how strong the economy was on the day this president was inaugurated. And 2 months later, the challenges of a volatile stock market, the challenges of rising prices, the challenges of declining consumer confidence, the challenges of predictions that there might be slow growth or even a recession. We will have a vote on the Senate floor tomorrow about Canadian tariffs based on a resolution that I've introduced that we will have a vote on. You talked at length about those tariffs and the effect that they have on Americans, as Mr. President and others. As I've traveled around my Commonwealth, my farmers and my small businesses, they've seen it before. They saw it in Trump term 1. They know how dangerous it will be. They don't want to pay more for groceries. They don't want to pay more for building supplies. Farmers don't want to pay more for fertilizer. My shipyards don't want to pay more for aluminum and steel. They were promised that they would pay less, not pay more. They don't want to be part of a campaign to demonize a nation that has been a friend of the United States and stood side by side with us in every war since the War of 1812. They don't want to be part of a juvenile assertion by this president that that sovereign nation is the 51st state. They don't want to be part of a name-calling effort to call the prime minister of a sovereign nation governor. They're trying to read the signs of the times. Why is this administration that came in with such a strong economic hand doing so much so quickly to both hurt us economically, but also to tarnish a relationship that has stood the test of time with an ally? The president often says that his goal is America first. We would all agree as members of this body in America first, but we would all passionately disagree with America alone. What is America alone gonna get us? What will we turn to? Who will we turn to when the allies that we've spent decades building relationships with now feel pushed aside? Yesterday, China announced that they were going to be working with Japan and Korea on a free trade zone, possibly to respond to U.S. tariffs. Other nations are having to engage in hedging behaviors because they thought we were friends, and now they doubt that reality anymore. And so as you look at the signs of these economic times, and then I'll get to a second question about the signs of the times in our democracy, how are we to understand this? And more importantly, how are we best to rectify it? How can we stand up for our families and reduce their burdens, not increase them? How can we stand shoulder to shoulder with linked arms with our allies to face off against adversaries? Reflect on the signs of the times and point us in the right direction. Please, question mark.
I appreciate that. I'm going to try to keep it short, but I want to reminisce with you about something that, do you remember in Trump's first term that he used a national security waiver to put tariffs on Canada then?
Yes. And my citizens really remember it because they suffered.
Yes. But do you remember, we had a Foreign Relations Committee meeting, and a leader, I don't want to embarrass the leader, but a leader from Canada came, it was a woman, and she sat there. It was a bipartisan group together. You do remember this?
Yes, I do.
So she sat there, and then she started very slowly going back to the War of 1812 and marched through Canadian-American history. But I didn't know all this history, but these amazing stories of Canadian sacrifice to stand next to Americans, to die next to Americans, to fight for America, to join our artists, our cultural communities, our arts, our agricultural communities, all the things we've done hand in hand to make both of our nations stronger and more prosperous. And then she looked at us and said, and then your president, in a sense, calls us a national security threat.
Yep.
And you all put tariffs on us. And I remember the quiet, the silence around that committee table. I felt like, whoa, this is such an ally, such a friend, such a consistent ally of us throughout the hardest, difficult times of history, never left our side. That her litany was so admirable. And then she looks at us, a national security waiver to put hardships on our economy, national security waiver to put tariffs on. And they hurt Americans, and they hurt bully are you? What kind of mean spirit do you look at your northern neighbor and say, I'm going to call you governor, not with the title you earned by the people that put you in that office? It is the worst kind of behavior, and nobody calls it out. Of our Republican colleagues, not enough of them call it out, I should say. As I read in that article, in an economic crisis, and I question, how long will we wait until more of us join in a chorus and saying enough is enough? I don't know the answers. I don't know how we can stop him, but I know we did in the first term. We pushed back on him successfully on his attempts to try to take health care away from tens of millions of Americans, and we can do it again, but more people have to do things differently. They have to do like we've been talking all day, and I'll turn to my colleague again, as John Lewis called us, get in good trouble. And determination with an indefatigable spirit, unyielding grace, they continue
about where we would stand in such a moment. And there were different forks in the road, a phrase that has attained some meaning recently. And Patrick Henry said, as for me, give me liberty or give me death. You're giving a liberty speech